All right, welcome in, welcome in. We have got a lot to talk about on this Tuesday as we let people trickle in. And once again, guys, typical college football show in the middle of June, especially with all the recruiting news we have to talk about. Several major institutions hosted huge weekends this weekend. We got to get into all that. We have to get into a litany of commitments. There's just a lot for us to talk about. And right before we were about to go on, I was already planning on talking about Clemson this evening. And right before we were about to go on, I get the notification, Hayes Fawcett on Twitter. I always say this, if you don't follow Hayes on Twitter, you have to, especially if you're here, because we're all recruiting fanatics. He keeps you up to date. He's getting all these guys when they're committing. He tweets out that Clemson gets a huge win on the trail in Ricardo Jones. Now, Ricardo Jones, for all those not aware, is a top 200 prospect in the nation, coming in specifically, I think, at 129 as I let this update, 142 in the nation. He's the number 12 safety, the number 22 player in the state of Georgia, a state absolutely loaded with talent. So, what does this mean, first and foremost, for Clemson's recruiting class? Well, it puts them within the top 10. And the reason why you want to know about that, the reason why that's interesting, there's only two classes right now in the top 10 that are located within the top 10 with less than 15 commits. We're talking Clemson, we're talking USC. So, as you can all see on the panel down below me, do not sleep on Clemson. Coming into this offseason, I had talked about this being a big year for the Clemson Tigers. Clemson was in a position where they were at the forefront of the national attention, and then Georgia came about. And Georgia has really supplanted Clemson as is the team we think of whenever we have the conversation who can topple the reign of Nick Saban and the Alabama Crimson Tide. Just a few years ago, Clemson was the team everybody pegged, and how could you not? Look at the results they'd given you in the playoffs. But then they started to, I don't want to say diminish, but at the same time, they just weren't there. They were a exceptional team, but they weren't competing for national championships. And something that's really interesting to note with Clemson is that since 2010, they've only been outside the top 20 offenses in the nation in back-to-back years twice. The 2010 2011 season, where in both of those seasons they were outside of the top 20 offenses in the nation, and they have remained one of the best offenses in the nation. And sure, you can give me a year. I think it was 2014. They didn't have a particularly great offense. 2015, maybe 2015 they did, but you can give me a year where maybe the offense wasn't stellar, but they were able to rebound the next year. It wasn't until 2021 and 2022 that Clemson found themselves in a similar position they found themselves in the 2010 2011 season, holding offenses that were on the outside looking into the top 20 offenses in the nation. In 2021, they had the 82nd ranked offense in the nation. In 2022, they had the 33rd ranked offense in the nation. So I bring all of this to your attention for a good reason. Clemson has still recruited very well. Clemson is still very talented. They have a 5-star quarterback. They have a 5-star running back. They have some very talented wide receivers. Heck, in this class right here, they have Bryant Wesco, a top 20 prospect in the nation, the number 5 wide receiver, incredibly gifted. And on top of that, they have TJ Moore, the 6'3" wide receiver who comes in as a top 175 prospect in the nation, who personally, I'm going to let it be known, I think is a little bit underrated. I'm going to just go ahead and throw it out there now. I said it when he committed to Clemson from Tampa Catholic in Tampa, Florida. We know what those Florida wide receivers do, but standing 6'3", 190, I challenge all of you to go watch his highlight tape and not have a blast watching it. He's an incredibly talented prospect, incredibly gifted prospect. And as Brandon just pointed out, it's not only about the talent they've acquired. Who's the offensive coordinator? It's Garrett Riley. And Garrett Riley now is going to have access to a different level of talent. Now, fair point. If you point me to the wide receiving core TCU had and says, Ty, that's a lot of talent in that wide receiving core, you're not wrong. They had an experienced quarterback. They had very gifted wide receivers that will be playing on Sundays. But I don't think anybody will disagree with me wholeheartedly when we say top to bottom, on every phase of the game, Clemson is a more talented program than is TCU. I don't think that that's a wild statement to say. So if you're a Clemson Tigers fan, you're recruiting very well. You're able to attract these 5-star quarterbacks. You're able to attract these 5-star playmakers, these blue chip playmakers, and then you get one of the most hotly coveted offensive coordinators in the nation. Do not sleep on the Clemson Tigers. I'm not telling you it's this year. I'm not telling you it's next year, but what I am telling you is don't make the same mistake I was starting to make. I was beginning to look at Clemson and I was starting to ask questions, and I think I will be eating crow. I do. I do. In fact, I think I already am eating crow. And I'm perfectly willing to admit this. Look, whenever we talk football, whenever we talk and have this many conversations, I'm bound to be wrong a lot. It's part of the fun of it. And I'll admit when I'm wrong. And I never said Clemson was going to fall into obscurity, but I was starting to say, hey, they're a team we need to watch because things are teetering right now, and they're still a really solid team. I don't think that they're going to fall out the top 25, but will they be the Clemson Tigers we've come to expect over the last 7 years? With the moves they've made, they're making sure they're relevant. You don't get a Garrett Riley and not stay relevant. I pointed you all towards the Clemson offensive stats because, we know about Clemson's defense. We know what Brent Venables did with that Clemson defense, but we also need to understand Clemson has held a very powerful offense for quite some time. A very powerful offense for quite some time. They can get back to that now. And it's not even the style of offense. It's just that what we saw last year wasn't creative, in my opinion. And now they're getting an offensive coordinator that will get creative. So I think Clemson is absolutely a team we need to watch. And the ACC as a whole has a lot of interesting pieces in it for this upcoming season. We're going to be doing a lot more ACC content, a lot more conversations there. Let's get to some comments here. Brandon says, while TCU got manhandled in the national championship, no doubt there. No arguments there. Riley is going to be able to pull more talent based off Clemson's history alone. 100%, Brandon. And this is the thing. Clemson already has this great history, and you're 100% in pointing it out. But now imagine you're Clemson, you have this history, and now you have Garrett Riley, who unlocks an entirely different way you can recruit the state of Texas, a state you already recruited well, very well. I mean, Clemson has not exactly struggled in the state of Texas. Cade Klubnik from the state of Texas, right? I mean, they have been able to land prospects, but now you give them a Garrett Riley. I mean, that's just a whole different end to this state, something we're going to have to watch. John says Clemson and FSU should be a great game. That's going to be must-see TV. Absolutely circle the game. Brandon Smith said, yeah, it should. Yep, that's going to be big. But guys, we cannot ignore what Clemson is doing right now. Dabo Swinney is on a hot streak. And it's interesting because Clemson typically starts a little bit slower, but I think whenever you're a team that's so close year in, year out, as Clemson was, let's be honest, if we're naming the handful of teams that even when they don't make the college football playoffs are right there looking in, Clemson is certainly one of them every year. You hand a Clemson a Garrett Riley, it moves the needle. And I think that's exactly what we're saying right here. We're going to be having a lot more conversations about Clemson. You need to circle them because it's really impressive what they're doing on the recruiting trail right now. To have a top 10 class with less than 15 prospects, only Clemson and USC are able to claim that right now. That's very impressive with a lot of time out in front. That's exactly what you want to do. John says, I think Riley has a lot to do with the Heat recruiting right now. He certainly does. No bias, but everybody talks about how OU is under, but he still recruited in the top. Yeah, no doubt, Brandon Smith. No doubt. This is one of the reasons and we'll talk about this when we get to Oklahoma, but this is one of the reasons why I remain a little bit bullish on Brent Venables, because first off, it's way, way, way too early. It's way, way, way too early. And we'll dive deeper into this, but two, what are the recruits saying? If the recruits are showing excitement, then there's a reason for fans to have hope. So I don't disagree with that notion at all. Speaking of teams that are red hot on the trail right now, let's talk Nebraska, guys, and Matt Rhule. You want to talk about a fan base that is absolutely starving for positive news. It's the Nebraska Cornhuskers, and luckily, you're eating good if you're a Nebraska fan under the Matt Rhule reign, because positive news has been a little bit of a trend for Nebraska this year. I mean, first off, we can start with what they're doing in the class of 2024, and we're going to have that conversation. But ladies and gentlemen, we also need to have a conversation about what they did in the class of 2023. Keeping Malachi Coleman home was big. I mean, that guy right there is going to be a very, very fun player to watch. 6'4", 190 pounds, speed that you just can't teach. Top 75 player in the nation, the number one player in the state of Nebraska, and he had options. He had plenty of options. He stayed home. That was a big win. But that wasn't the only top guy they got. They came into the state of Texas and got a big win for an edge, which is huge. When Nebraska was really good, and I remember this very vividly. When Nebraska was very good, my father would look at me and say, you know what, for a team like Nebraska, it's amazing that they can walk into Plano and go and get these recruiting wins. When you look around the state of Texas and you see all of these powerful schools, and that was the case. Back when Nebraska was good, they were able to recruit the state of Texas, get their wins, and be able to convert. We're starting to see the recruiting pick up again. Nebraska has 20 commits. They sit outside the top 15 at number 16 in the nation, but there are plenty of big fish on the board for Nebraska. Look, we always have this conversation, where do you want to sit in recruiting? And one of the things you've heard me talk about a lot, especially as we just get done talking about a Clemson class, as we get done talking about a USC class, as we prepare to talk about a Texas and Oklahoma, I believe there are advantages to taking your time and starting recruiting. I believe there are advantages, and I can point you to several instances. If you allow me, I can point you to last year Notre Dame, where Notre Dame started that class out last year. Unbelievable. Had five-star Keon Keeley, had Peyton Bowen, had Dylan Edwards. I mean, they had a lot of talent in that class, but other schools got to chip away. Notre Dame still had a great class, but other schools got to chip away an awful lot. So I think there is something to starting a little bit slower, playing your cards right, and then really surging around the month of July and as the season starts, because then you can get kids on campus to visit during games. That's awesome. That's a totally different type of environment. So I think there's absolutely something to that. But at the same time, and I'm interested in hearing from y'all, I think when you're a team like Nebraska, you need all the help you can get. You're not in a position like in Alabama, where you're sitting there saying, we're outside the top 45 recruiting classes and it's the beginning of July. That's cool. Call me in November. Alabama does this every year. Nebraska is not in that position right now, and that's all well and good. Nebraska is in a position where right now they are generating excitement and they are trying to capitalize off of that excitement. And we need to understand that, in my opinion, is absolutely the correct approach for Nebraska. Nothing in life is totally black and white. There is a level of nuance with everything we approach. And in the attempt at finding the nuance with Nebraska in relation to how do you want to start recruiting, you want to get wins in the manner that will help your class. For Nebraska, show people that people want to play there. You're a top 20 class with 20 prospects. You're killing the state of Nebraska recruiting. You're going into a Texas and getting a Mario Buford just outside the top 300 prospects at 322. You're going and getting a Roger Gradney, 323. So if you're Nebraska, if you're Matt Rhule, you're loving this recruiting success right now. It is awesome to sit back and watch because Nebraska, and I say this every time, they're an interesting case because their fans, they remember the success they had. Now, depending on the age of the fan, if you're younger than me, it might get kind of hard to remember. I think I'm probably about the youngest that will remember the reign of Nebraska. And that was because it was shoved down my throat. But at the same time, it's not far enough away that it's been forgotten, but it's close enough in the rear view that any further down the trail we get, and people will start forgetting, because college football, like sports in general, is a what have you done for me recently scenario. And that's the uncomfortable truth to sports. It's how we get into the notion of this comment up here, where Brandon Smith is talking about how people talk about Brent Venables after the year they had. It's how we get into the notion of this Sarkisian comment right here, which both of these comments are 1,000% correct. Same thing with Sarkisian when he got a top 5 class after 5 and 7. And people on the outside, not Texas fans have advocated for Steve Sarkisian. Oklahoma fans have advocated for Brent Venables, but people on the outside would talk. And you're sitting there and you're like, well, there's a level of nuance here that we're not approaching. Nebraska's in an interesting situation, and Matt Rhule is a guy that, by all accounts, can turn this around. Now, interestingly enough, when we were having this conversation last week, someone came in the chat and they said, "What about Matt Rhule's time in the NFL? That was a flop." Guys, I think we have got to stop doing this. I do it as well, but we all, as college football fans, we have got to stop doing this. Looking at a coach and saying, because you weren't successful in the NFL, that somehow lessens you as a college coach. They're different games. They truly are different games. Yes, it's the game of football, either way, but you're dealing with totally different scenarios. I mean, in college, you are the head coach getting paid. In the NFL, your players are making more than you. It is a totally different dynamic here. And some guys are just better suited for the college game. That's not to diminish their X's and O's acumen. Brilliant coaches, brilliant. They're just better suited to the college game. John Bailey points out Nick Saban, and Nick Saban didn't have the greatest tenure in the NFL. Miami Dolphins staff did not pass Drew Brees. They had a real rocky time running the Wildcat. Be interesting to see what would have happened if he could have continued in the NFL, but this is a prime example. Are we to look at Nick Saban and say, you're less because a few years in the NFL didn't go well? So we also need to have this notion in our minds that just because the Carolina stuff didn't go according to plan, that doesn't mean anything on Matt Rhule. Matt Rhule showed that he could turn around a program like Baylor, and that showed a lot. Now he inherits a Nebraska program that's hungry. They're real hungry. And I'm very interested to see how he can get them back on top. Let's take a look at some comments before we jump into some Texas talk. Cordy says, imagine a Big Ten with Ohio State, Michigan, USC, Nebraska, and Penn State. I can't wait. I cannot wait. And especially if Nebraska takes strides forward. Because I think there's this notion we have, right, as college football fans, where whenever a coach will get hired, Oklahoma fans, Texas fans, you'll really resonate with this. If there's any Colorado fans in here, you'll resonate with this as well. And if it's not 8, 9, 10 wins instantly, it's a failure. It's a failure. It didn't happen. Right. That's one of the things I worry about with Coach Prime. I don't worry about Coach Prime. I worry about the perception, because the court of public opinion is a very, very powerful thing. And I will love to debate that point. I think the court of public opinion is one of the most fascinating aspects of day-to-day life, of our day-to-day lives. It touches absolutely everything. So the way we perceive things, right? I've never liked this notion that things have to be rebuilt or fixed like that, because I think that doesn't really take into account what really happened here. I don't think that allows for nuance, and this might surprise some of you. Nuance is something I'm huge on. Love that. Rhule had Baylor competing for a Big 12 title with 40th, 29th, and 38th recruiting classes. He's going to succeed on the back of recruiting. And man, if he starts recruiting top 25, it's going to be a lot of fun. The new age of college football coaches need 3 years. That's always been my assumption, John. That has absolutely always been what I've said, 3 years. But I will grant you this. I just talked about the need for nuance. If you come to me and say, hey, it's been year 3, but there are some extenuating circumstances. The program was in a real bad state when they got here. We have seen signs of growth. I'm going to sit there and put my hands up and say, go for it. Go for it. Don't do anything. All you need to show me is growing. I don't need to show that Rome was built overnight, because I'm going to have a lot of questions about the sustainability of Rome if it was built overnight. That'd be great. You won't argue with it, but you get the point I'm trying to make here. It's way too early for people to worry about coaches that are in year 1, 2. It's way, way too early, way too soon. Checking some stuff. And guys, thoughts and prayers out to Ryan Mallett. Unfortunately, news came out right as we were going live that he has passed away. And that's just awful to hear. So if, Arkansas fans out there that may watch this, that's terrible. Thoughts and prayers are with you and your fan base and the family of Ryan Mallett, because it's just awful to hear. You never want to hear anything like that. And I feel like the last 2 streams we've had to break or talk about some really bad news on the stream. Last week with A&M's coach, this week with Ryan Mallett. So hopefully that's the last bit of bad news we have for the foreseeable future, because that's never a good thing, man. So thoughts and prayers out to the Mallett family and Arkansas fans everywhere. Hopefully everything can go smoothly after this for the family and everything. That's just an awful thing. But going forward into Texas trending for the number one edge. And guys, we talked about this last week. Colin Simmons, number one edge in the nation, number one player in the state of Texas, top 10 player nationally. I mean, goodness gracious, what accolades do we need to lay at his feet? He is an unbelievable talent, plays for Duncanville, visited the Texas Longhorns this weekend. By all accounts, that visit went very well. Now, if we looked, Colin Simmons had been fonged to LSU. We know what the crystal balls from Wilt Fong mean. I mean, if he inserts a crystal ball in your favor, that means something. But that crystal ball is from 2022. The newest crystal ball prediction comes in favor of the Texas Longhorns on 24/7 Sports, and also on 3 logged some predictions in the favor of the Texas Longhorns. So whenever we look at this, if you're Texas, you have got to love that, right? One thing I always talk about, follow the visits. And if you look right now, the only visit left that we know about thus far, the only official left, is to Texas A&M, June 26th. Now, I'm sure all Texas fans will be watching that closely. And I'm sure he'll be going back out to LSU. Make no mistake about it. He will be absolutely going back out to LSU, visiting LSU more. I don't believe he's had his official to LSU, so he might take that during the season. What we just talked about earlier. Teams like LSU, Bama, Georgia, sometimes they'll say, hey, take the official visit when we have a big game out here. Can't beat those atmospheres. That might be what LSU is looking to do. But I'd have to go through, check how many officials he's taken. At the end of the day, that's irregardless because he could take an unofficial. And I have been on record stating, I think unofficials are just as important as officials. What would he mean to the Texas Longhorns class? Well, Texas has started a little bit slow in recruiting. Now, they've picked it up here over the past week or so. There's outside the top 50 classes, number 54, but they only have 7 prospects. Way too early for anybody to be worried about where they currently sit. Heck, we're in the building phase of these foundations for these classes, and Texas is coming off of big back-to-back weekends in terms of visitor talent there. But Colin Simmons is a bit of a unique prospect for the Texas Longhorns because of the defense they run and who the defensive coordinator is, number 1. Number 2, you're moving to the SEC. The last thing you want to do is move to the SEC and say, oh, we didn't land Colin Simmons and we have to see him at LSU. That's not what you want to do. That's the last thing you want to do. But we also need to understand LSU is a recruiting machine. They have been a recruiting machine for quite some time. This is something we absolutely have got to watch. Because if the Texas Longhorns can pull through on this battle, this is the type of prospect that will cause a snowball effect. This is the type of prospect that will pop and other guys will want to follow. Make no mistake about it. You don't end up as a top 10 player nationally and not have that type of ability. Not only that, he goes to Duncanville, a lot of other talented prospects in Duncanville and in the DFW region. So when we look at Texas, who's on the case here? It's Jeff Banks. For those of you not aware, Jeff Banks is a guy that has been an ace recruiter for quite some time. Pretty much everywhere he's been. If we look at this, we're looking at 5 stars like Kyle Allen, DJ Campbell, Anthony Hill, Christian Kirk, Jonte Cook, Kelvin Bakes, Malik Muhammad. Then we get into some 4 stars in Malik Muhammad, Ajayi Hall, Christian Leary, Jalen Milrow, DeAndre Moore Jr., Brennan Thompson, Marcus Banks, Courtney Davis, Colton Blanton. I mean, I can go on, but I think we all understand the point here. Jeff Banks can recruit. He is a serious recruiter. Now, 24/7 Sports has him as the primary, but we all know the whole of the Texas staff is on this. Let's be honest here. This is going to be a must-land, or as close to a must-land prospect for Texas as there is. To be honest, I think if we get Calhoun from Georgia, I think that moves the needle because, hey, if you can get a win out of Georgia, you'd never argue that. Never argue that. Because one of the things, to your point, one of the things I like about a lot of these prospects out of Georgia, there's a lot of competitive high school football out there. Colin Simmons is no stranger to competitive high school football. But he wasn't the only five-star in attendance for Texas, and he wasn't the only guy we need to talk about, quite frankly, because the Texas Longhorns exited the weekend with two big wins. First, Jarrett Gibson, just outside of five-star range, coming in at number 39 in the nation. The number 2 running back plays for IMG. Now, whenever we're talking about Jarrett Gibson, the conversation is much easier had asking what he can't do instead of us going through what he can do. Very gifted back, plays for IMG, embraces competition. I love that. We talk about that all the time. Iron sharpens iron. But the real conversation, and there is a conversation that needs to be had, there's a running back coach in college football that is showing everybody who's willing to listen, who's willing to watch, they are a serious player in any conversation we have. And that's Tashard Choice, the running back coach for the Texas Longhorns. The more you look into Tashard Choice, the more you got to like. Let's start with his coaching career, where he started with the Dallas Cowboys as an intern in 2016, moved from there to a graduate assistant at UNT, where I actually graduated, and I currently am in Denton, Texas. He was a graduate assistant there in 2017. I was actually at UNT when he was there. Running back coach 2018. I was at UNT. UNT had a fantastic running back while he was there. He went from UNT to Georgia Tech, where he ultimately made his way when he was in college football. He ended up at Georgia Tech, having originally started at Oklahoma, then transferred after an injury to Georgia. Or I'm sorry, not after an injury, after a family situation. I apologize. After a family situation, transferred from Oklahoma to Georgia Tech. Ended up in the NFL. Ended up at Georgia Tech as the running back coach from 2019 to 2021, then found his way to Texas as the running back coach from 2022 on. As a recruiter, he has 1 5-star and CJ Baxter. He has 3 top 100 prospects and Baxter, Jarrett Gibson, Jahmyr Gibbs, 4 top 300 prospect, same as the list above, plus Christian Kirk, and 7 4 or 5-star running backs. Guys, he has not been a running back coach for a Power 5 school, but since 2019. And he already has 7 4 or 5-star running backs under his belt. That's incredible. That is truly incredible. What he has been able to do in such a short time on the recruiting trail is something we have got to take note in. And it's something I talk about with DeMarco Murray all the time. It's a reason why anytime DeMarco Murray is on the recruiting trail, I think he's got a really interesting pitch. He can sit across from a high school football player and their parents and look at them and say, I have been you. I was where you were. I went through the process. I understand every integral jump you're going to make, from school to relationships, being away from home. I've gone through it all. So too can Tashard Choice. He can make that same pitch. Look, Texas is in a position where we're going to have to watch them in relation to several prospects. Not only on the offensive side, on the defensive side. Texas is in a situation where they absolutely could pop here in the next few weeks, and that's going to be something we are going to be talking about. Tashard wrapped up the recruiting job up for, he truly, man, truly. It's so impressive what he has done in such a short amount of time. And I think the real thing here is I don't think that it's nationally being recognized. Like, no doubt about it. Nino, Texas, Homer, Steven with Fanatics Perspective, Nash, all those guys inside they got you covered, right? Those are all phenomenal content creators. They recognize and talk about and bring to the attention what a great running back coach Tashard Choice is. But I cover college football in general, right? More people on the national stage. And I'm not on the national stage. I'm just saying, like, I cover as much as I can. We all need to be having conversations about Tashard Choice. It's so impressive. And if this year, if they go out there and that rushing attack looks dangerous, which first and foremost, we need to understand, Steve Sarkisian, he's going to have a dangerous rushing attack. That's a truth we all need to accept. And yes, Bijan's not there. Yes, Roshan's not there. They still have Keelan Robinson. They still have Blue. They still have Brooks. They still have a lot of guys, not to mention the 5-star running back. They still have a very talented offensive line that's going to be better in run blocking this year. I like their chances. I like their chances. It's going to be a hit. No team ever lost a talent like Bijan Robinson and didn't feel it. I can promise you that. Bijan's incredible. But they have talent in the room, and we need to recognize that. So for the Texas Longhorns, Texas fans, interesting position to be in right now. Something we have got to watch as they continue to try and add in some wins, as we have some friendly trash talk from a Colorado fan saying, I'd rather be dead than red, go Buffs. I love it. I love it, Randy. Thank you for joining in this evening. Cordy says that O-line will be top 10 this year, and next year upperclassmen will be. That offensive line is interesting, truly interesting. Kyle Flood, great offensive line coach, not only from a recruiter's perspective, and that's the other thing we're going to talk about before we move on to the next topic, and we're going to wind it down. This isn't going to be a super long stream this evening, but the next thing I did want to talk about in relation to Texas is the other win y'all got, Nate Kibble. 430 nationally, number 26 interior offensive lineman from Humble, Texas. And Kyle Flood continues to flex his muscles on the trail. It wasn't long ago, whenever Kyle Flood was the offensive line coach for Alabama, that he brought in an offensive line class for Alabama that I challenged everybody. Find me a better class. Not in terms of what they'll do when they get to college, because how could we know that at the time, right? Like they just signed pen to paper. Find me a better class of a collection of high school talent that had signed to go play college football somewhere. We were talking the number 1 and 2 tackles in the nation. We were talking the number 2 guard in the nation and the number 1 center in the nation. The very next year, he goes to Texas, 2 5-star tackles, a bunch of 4-star guards, and gives you a class that if I asked you that same question, find me an offensive line class where the guys grade any higher, you can point me and present to me Kyle Flood's next class. It's not just the coaching here, guys. He is an ace recruiter, No doubt about that. And they're adding in more talent on the offensive line, a problem Texas absolutely had to address, a problem I'm very glad they're successfully addressing. Ran Rodriguez says, question for you, Alabama fans. If Alabama, for some reason, doesn't make the playoffs the next 2 years, do you think Bama says goodbye? Oh, Saban can leave whenever he wishes. He's given Alabama fans, so unless the wheels fall off, right? Like if Bama loses 2 games and they miss the playoffs, it is what it is. Is it disappointing? Sure. It's because of the expectations and the perceptions we have of Alabama. But is that the end of the world for Nick Saban? No. No, I mean, goodness gracious, still a top 10 program in the nation. But Nick Saban has a different type of competitive fire. And the one thing he's been adamant on is he wants to stop whenever he feels like he can't yield the same results he's used to yielding. When that is, I have no idea. But, and I don't speak for the university. I don't speak for all Alabama fans. I speak for myself. Nick Saban can go out whenever he wants to go out. He has given myself, and I would imagine all Bama fans everywhere, more joy watching college football than we could imagine. Whatever he would like to do, I champion. Nick Saban has earned the right to have another statue put in front of Bryant Denny. Heck, he can have 2 more for all I care. Yeah, and John's right. If we actually look in the class of 2025, there's something scary brewing for Bama in the class of 2025. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but there is something terrifying that could be brewing in Alabama's favor in the class of 2025 from a wide receiver position, and I can't wait. Let's look at what Brandon says. Brandon says, if they don't make the playoffs in the next 2 years, almost impossible with the expanded playoffs. Yeah, 100%, Brandon. Saban would leave on his own accord. Don't think he could. I don't know that he would, but at the same time, like I just said, that goes into the theory of, to me, it's whenever Saban wants to leave. And you, Brandon, essentially hit the same thought process I laid forward. So 100%. I think the day, it's actually funny. Ryan Williams, 5-star wide receiver in the class of 2025, was doing an interview, fantastic interview with the guys at Bama Online for On 3. Unbelievable Alabama football coverage. On 3 has assembled such a deep collection of talent. Pretty much everywhere, but that Bama site is wild. John, you already know where I'm going with this. And they asked Ryan Williams, the 5-star wide receiver, because so many teams are trying to flip Ryan Williams. He's incredible. He's going to be a top 5 player nationally. I mean, he is so talented. They were asking him, well, what are you saying to schools? They're telling you Nick Saban's going to retire. He said, I asked Saban that. Saban told me he's going to coach till he dies. And he just left. And so, we joke, but Saban's built different. The man is up there in age and still looks fantastic. Would be interesting. I don't think it's gonna. But why I asked if he keeps recruiting top 2 classes but misses playoffs would be in it. Yeah. But like I said, Rand, I think that we also need to understand the nuance of why they missed the playoffs. You know what I mean? I mean, they were 4 points off from being undefeated, playing Tennessee with a super high-powered offense, and LSU was a really good team. They were just really good. So you're not wrong. You're certainly not wrong. That's not what Alabama is accustomed to, missing playoffs. But at the same time, that's why I said if it's a season that mirrors this year was just a wild year. Absolutely was. And I think that's something that that doesn't bother me at all. That doesn't bother me in the least. But it is an interesting perspective, no doubt about that. And yeah, John, to your point, whenever we're about to jump into this, Bama looking to close onto some top prospects. John Bailey types in chat, Jamie French, Ryan Williams, next big Bama names. Jamie French crystal balled to Alabama today. That would be a massive win. 2 5-star receivers in the same class. That's exactly what Alabama wants. That's exactly what Wiggins wants. And they've had a lot of success with the wide receivers. I don't think I need to go through the list of here in the past 10 years, all the talented wide receivers that have come from Alabama. I mean, they have a real stake at wide receiver U. Putting 5 wide receivers in the first round of the NFL draft in 3 years. Unbelievable production. John Mechie was very highly selected in the draft as well. They have put out a lot of wide receivers. And right now, in the class of 2025, I think they're about to close on 2 5-star guys. Cordy says Ryan Williams having second thoughts. I don't know, man. I know he took the visit to Texas, but kid grew up a Bama fan. And Julian saying is Himothy. And that definitely helps Alabama's chances. But let's be honest here. Texas, that's a hell of a pitch. We know what Steve Sarkisian does offensively. He will entertain that pitch. There's no doubt that he will entertain it, right? Steve Sarkisian offensive mind. He has what he's done with wide receivers. He'll listen to the pitch. I mean, he should at least. Rand saying, I saw Tennessee. No. Tennessee can claim a lot, not that. Ohio State, LSU, they can claim it. They can hop in that argument. There are a lot of other schools that, within the next 3 to 4 years, they can make a claim at it. Yeah, no doubt. But right now it's Alabama, Ohio State, LSU. What they're doing with the wide receivers are just unbelievable. Unbelievable. Julian saying from Crunchyroll. Hey, yeah, he's a must-land prospect. But it's not just all relegated to the class of 2025 for Alabama. Actually, another crystal ball prediction went in favor of the Crimson Tide just earlier. 4-star interior offensive lineman Casey Poe. Now, depending on where you look, he's rated as the number 1 interior offensive lineman by some places. This is going to be something we have to watch. And it gets me to a conversation I have often, which is Coach Eric Wolford is a name you need to know. He inherited an offensive line for Alabama that was really in a bad position. It was a really shaky offensive line. Doug Marrone was the offensive line coach before Coach Eric Wolford got there. Eric Wolford steps into an offensive line that had just lost a top 10 pick to the NFL draft. Gone. He inherits a line that doesn't have that guy, and they're still better than the year before. How that happens, I think, just shows you that the coaching matters at this level so much. But now he's getting to stack another year under his belt with the familiarity of the guys currently there. And we talk about the offensive line class. Kyle Flood netted both Texas and Alabama. But we also need to give love to the offensive line class Eric Wolford just pulled. Where, I mean, they got some really good guys. Caden Proctor being the cherry on top. You're looking at Olas Alinen, Miles McVay. I mean, you're talking about some huge wins in the offensive line department. Coach Eric Walford was huge, huge. So for Alabama, if they are able to convert that for Casey Poe, that would be a massive win. It's a big need, as John Bailey points out. But understand this as we get into July. Alabama, for the past few years, has shown us fireworks whenever we start getting into this time of the year. July, August. They start going real hard. That's going to be something we have to watch. Alabama currently sits outside the top 15 classes in the nation. I don't think that's going to be the case long. They have an insane average recruit rank and already an insane foundation for their recruiting class. I talk about it all the time. Don't be worried, depending on where your recruiting class is ranked. Alabama ranks as the number 32 recruiting class in the nation right now. 3 5-stars. A bunch of 4-stars. Average recruit rank of 94.37. This is going to be a class that really accelerates. And keep your eye on some flips. They're after some Georgia prospects, and they really want to flip them. Now, that's much easier said than done. Georgia, how can you argue with their pitch right now? You can't. But they're after the flip for a few prospects. Keep your eye on that. Alabama is about to boom on the trail. We're going to have to watch that. Let's look at some of these comments. Shadow with the horns up. Glad you could join us, Shadow. Wait till you see DeBose at full health. Hey, I was actually just thinking about that the other day when I made a video on him because I was watching him play. Then I realized he had the ACL injury. But I was sitting there watching his film thinking, Poe, how? How is he outside the top 150? And then I realized it's because his whole junior year was done. Right. I got hurt game 1, junior year. Circle the name. I give y'all a few recruits. I say a few. I give y'all probably 20 recruits every year. I have every year at least. And I say, circle the name. And I know you think I say it a lot. I do. But circle this name. A year of healthy football under his belt in his senior year, he could fly up the board. He could. He is really, really gifted. Completely agree with you there. Tatum might go to Southern Cal. He might, but at the same time, he might go to OU. That's going to be an interesting battle. I predict 10 plus in July. That'd be great. Thank you for all the substantive content. Denton and Texas closer to doesn't sound like those Bears might be from a different. Yeah, actually, all my family is my mom's side of the family came from Virginia. My dad's side of the family was upstate New York. And so growing up, I spent basically all summer. As soon as I'd get out of school, I'd be shipped up to upstate New York and around like Richmond, Virginia, then in Washington, D.C. So I spent a lot of time in the area. Texas will own July's recruiting headline. So many decisions are coming. I think there are a few teams. We need to circle. And I think I'm actually going to make a video on that. That actually sounds like a great video. Talking about some teams we need to circle. And I think you're 100% right. Texas is absolutely one of them. I think Alabama is one of them. I think Oklahoma could be one of them. If they get some big time wins, they could snowball, right? But Oklahoma is interesting because of the visit policy. So it's one of those things where if the dominoes start to fall, it'll really start to just snowball. But it's going to be interesting. It could be July. It could be August. But that's one we have to watch. Woodward, I think, is flipping. I've heard very good things. Very good things. Technical Technician says, just wanted to say you do a fantastic job. Well spoken. Thank you very much, man. Thank you for taking the time to come in here and just talk college football with us, man. You don't know how much that means. It's just a ton of fun. LFG says, I hate Alabama college football. Fair. But Julian's saying, wow, I know, man. It's so interesting with Julian Sayin because whenever I would talk about Julian Sayin, I thought there was this notion out there when people would look at him, they'd say, you're a quarterback with an insanely high floor, meaning you're really safe. We're going to take you. We know what we're getting. You might not have the highest ceiling, but you have a really high floor. And I think as time is going on, we're starting to see you don't just have a very high floor. You have a really high ceiling. there's a lot of good quarterbacks in this class. John says, I think Sayed is definitely the number one quarterback in this class. Hey, he's got a stake at it, but so too does Dylan Raiola. Let's not take anything away from that young man. I know. Saying won Elite 11 MVP. Dylan Raiola right behind him. Raiola's got an absolute cannon attached to his body. He continues to mature. He's going to be fantastic. But Julian's saying, I don't think there's any question that those two are the top two quarterbacks of the nation. I think that was kind of the takeaway everybody had walking away from the Elite 11. I think everybody was just like, okay, great quarterback class this year once again, but those two, phenomenal. I think Dylan's just bigger. Could be. He is definitely bigger. USC media has running back Tatum as a heavy OU lean. Tatum's dad has connections to the OU baseball coach, East Texas kid. Yep. Close to home. And that's the thing. If the Oklahoma baseball situation is a big deal and the battle for Taylor Tatum. And I think that's going to be the deciding factor there. That's going to be something we have to continue watching, though, because one thing in recruiting we have to understand, there are punches and counter punches. USC punched, Brent Venables in Oklahoma came back, and now we need to see if USC is going to send that final shot out, trying to see what they can't do. But Oklahoma, by all reports, by everything I've been told, by people I have asked, they did fantastic work with Taylor Tatum. Fantastic work. It's going to be something we need to watch. And proximity. I don't know that that's a big deal for Taylor Tatum, but it could be. That could be a very big deal for Taylor Tatum. Mike G says Tatum to USC or Oklahoma. If I had to pick right now, Mike, and make no mistake, I'm no insider. I'm just someone who reads tea leaves and just gives my opinion on the matter. I think it's really trending right now to Oklahoma. He came off the visit to USC, loved it, and then had the visit to Oklahoma. And it kind of goes with what I'm just saying. You have punches and counter punches. And I think USC punched real strong. But I think OU returned with a phenomenal counter punch. They're preaching real heavy the running back this class, OU is. And I think whenever we look, they have, like LFG says, they have the connection with the baseball coach there. I think right now the cards are showing us Oklahoma. It's recruiting. Anything can happen at any time. But right now, if I had to insert a pick, it would be Oklahoma. Yeah, it'd be for Oklahoma. Michigan done at tailback. Michigan's recruiting is so interesting right now, Mike. So interesting. Let's take a look at this, actually. This is a great conversation to have before we get up out of here. This is a great conversation. I want to get into some more Michigan content. They're sitting as the number 3 class in the nation, right? And you might say to yourself, okay, well, they have 23 prospects. How good is the class? They have above a 90 average recruit rank. That's fantastic. For 23 prospects in your class, you're averaging over a 90 in June. I almost said July. In June. Unbelievable work by Harbaugh, by staff, and another school. I started this off by saying that I had to eat a little bit of crow on Clemson. I have to eat a lot more crow on Michigan. I've said this about 4 or 5 times. Heck, the video is still up on my channel. I did not know that Michigan would be able to get where they're going right now. Not that I didn't know. Obviously, Harbaugh is a great coach. We all know that. I didn't know if he'd be given the time. And they weren't winning the big games. And it just didn't look like it was going in a direction conducive to success. In the last 2 years, they have turned it around. So Michigan's recruiting situation is super interesting. 14 4-stars. 14 4-stars in this class. A quarterback that's teetering on 5-star range. They still have room for some moves. This is a class we got to keep up with. And I think, once again, we had this conversation earlier. How would you rather recruit? I think it all just depends, right? For a Nebraska, you need to capitalize on momentum. There's a lot of excitement with Nebraska right now. Capitalize on that momentum. For Michigan, if you're in a situation where you're moving the needle for these kids, they're going, they're visiting, they're loving what they see off of going to the playoffs. Yeah, go ahead. Rack it up. Get into a position where you start off the year and your recruiting class is looking in a real good position. You only have to worry about a few loose ends here and there. That's a good place to be. That's a real good place to be. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Um, yeah, LFG says me neither. Shocked about Michigan's recruiting. Yeah, I didn't know that they would be in a position like they are right now, beating Ohio State back to back years. I gotta eat some crow on Jim Harbaugh. I do. I never said he wasn't a good coach. I'll remain adamant in that. We all know he's a good coach, but I did not know that they would be able to go from where they were to where they are, because it was more of status quo. Whenever Harbaugh was there, it's not that they were bad. They were a good team, but they were Michigan. They were remaining Michigan. Now he has them taking off. He's got them taking off. We got to watch it. Cordy says Napier too. I've been a fan. Oh, you're talking about who's going to cook. Yeah, no, goodness me. Florida's recruiting right now on fire, and USC recruiting right now is on fire. On fire. They are just lining up recruiting wins. And I did want to talk about that. Let's take a look at that, because we talked about Clemson earlier. There are two teams right now that find themselves within the top 10 recruiting classes in the nation with less than 15 teams. Clemson coming in at 10, USC coming in at 8. USC boasts an average recruit rank of 92.43. This is a very impressive class they're putting together. And it's they've got two very impressive wide receivers. They got some very impressive defensive backs, Marcellus Williams and Dakota Fields, both very impressive defensive backs. They've got a very impressive tight end who's 6'7", 245, and who can actually get out in space and move. Very talented edge from Georgia. I mean, they are really putting in work. Two tight ends, an offensive lineman who sits at number 310 in the nation. But if we're really being technical, this guy will probably end up as a top 300 prospect. Once again, circle the name, Manase Aitite. Going to be a phenomenal player. Hasn't played high school football very long, already 310 in the nation. So USC is recruiting at a very high level right now. The one thing I want to see from USC, though, OU lands Xavier Robinson. I'm going to have a video coming out about that right as this ends, so that's fantastic. But great win for OU, by the way. Great win for OU. Kid might be a 3-star. That's a diamond in the rough prospect. That's a diamond in the rough prospect. And when I talk about that in the video that will be coming up as soon as we get out of here. But this is the one question I have for USC. This is the one thing I need to see them do. One, recruit defense, but we've already established that. We've had that conversation. That's known. I need them to take a full class. I need them to take a full class. Not a full transfer portal class, which is great. That's fantastic. I need them to take a full recruiting class, especially going into the Big Ten. Lincoln Riley recruits really well. He does. His classes always end up well. But it's just that he hasn't always gotten the biggest recruiting classes. I'd like to see him take a full 22, 25 prospects in this class, then work the transfer portal. I think that'd be great for USC long-term success, but I do like how they're recruiting, the direction it's going. OU gets Robinson. Like I said, guys, 3-star running back, but not 3-star production. 2,559 yards, something like that, his junior season. I know it was 2,500 plus yards his junior season, 39 touchdowns, averaging 9.3 yards per carry, comes outside the top 600 prospects in the nation, which is an absolute crime. Absolute crime. And the one thing he brings to the table, 6'2", 220, goes to Carl Albert High School. You think at 6'2", 220, he's just straight line speed. He's got some wiggle to him. I'm not saying he's Le'Veon Bell, but he's got a lot more lateral mobility than I thought he would have when I watched the tape. This is a fantastic prospect. He's a diamond in the rough type of guy. He's the type of guy that we look back on and talk about later on. And I make an example. I talk about more another prospect that came from Oklahoma. That, kind of very similar. Very similar type deal. But we're going to go ahead and get out of here. Guys, if you want to see more of me tonight, I will be on the Bama Standard at 8 o'clock as we talk all things Alabama football. Tomorrow, I will be on the SEC Connect as we talk all things SEC. You can join me, Chris Griffin with the K, Jay from Unfair Sports, Steven with the Horns Down Podcast, Nino. All of us talk all things SEC. More videos coming your way tomorrow. Until then, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you on the next live Thursday, 11 o'clock in the morning on Through the Haze, and then Friday, 5:30 Central Standard Time. Can't wait to see you. Until then, see ya. Now the spinning